welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia Vigilantes, the anime, and this week we're going to be reviewing the latest episode titled Makato/Truth, and we kick off this review as we always do with these reviews by talking about the positives and the headline positives, the major points of discussion for the rest of this review. I loved the combination of art styles throughout this episode. I found the lore insights to be interesting, and I think that this is ultimately a very charming episode overall. Now, I just have to say is I really do love the different art styles that are introduced and integrated into the flow of this episode. Not just the art styles and the quality of them, but how they are used. I will just say, in all due fairness, the animation this week was still as good as it has always been, very consistent, and I have to give thumbs up to it. It is a really it is thrilling as someone who has read the manga to see some of these action sequences come to life. Even ones this week where it's a little bit more silly and a little more goofy, but you know what, just seeing just the wide diversity of quirks and how strange they can be is just another wonderful thing to see this week. I have to say, though, that the big thing for me is the various different moments of just the, I don't know how best to describe them, but the freeze frames of art that we get throughout this episode, as well as the styles of them, and, like I say, how they are used. This is an episode that is used to introduce Makato to the cast and to the audience as well. Apologies if I got that name wrong, but you understand how these things are. This is an episode that we get to understand more about her. This is our first introduction into this series, and this is these moments, these different moments of stylized just freeze frames, I think are fascinating because I think it gives us something of an insight into a little bit more of her as a character, and that, you know, the truth of the matter is, from her point of view, she doesn't know who the Crawler and Knuckle Dust and Pop State really are. She doesn't really know what they properly look like, and she might only really have just blurry pictures and whatnot to go off of. So when she's talking about them, we see these very stylized, very strange interpretations of Crawler and Knuckle Duster and Pop Step. With, I think one of them makes Knuckle Duster look more like a bull, and there's another one which makes Pop Step look more like some kind of strange demon bat lady. And those are cool. Those are cool little things because it's showing how that she's interpreting the information and the descriptions of these characters that she's had over the past few weeks or months, or however long it's been that she's doing in this investigation. And we also have the fun little moment where she's talking to Crawler about, Crawler's reputation of being a bit of a creep on campus. Sure, a reputation that isn't warranted, but one that, you know, is one that he's been given because of his, for what happened a couple episodes ago, and just you get that neat little freeze frame again, that freeze frame of artwork where it's this creepy version of Crawler standing in this dark area just with his massive hands and his red glowing eyes. This is an episode that really just kicked the crap out of our cast, doesn't it? But we'll discuss that later on. As I say, these are two moments alone which really do go some way to underlining Makato and what an imaginative and curious person that she can be. But at the same time, it isn't just random curiosity, because if it was, and just purely her imagination, then these character designs, these interpretations of them, with the exception of the thing where she's thinking about Crawler being creepy, will be far more stylized and would be far more exaggerated. They would look far less like our mainline cast. They'd look even more strange, more surreal, more abstract, or just a little bit creepier and weirder, more just shadowy and mysterious. So the way that they're shown does indicate that she knows some things, but of course at this point she does not know who Crawler and the rest of them really are, or rather who Crawler really is. Though, to be honest with you, this is something you could probably put together in next to no time, and I don't think you really need a quirk to do it. The big standout moment for me as far as the artwork is concerned, though, is the introduction of the more traditional American comic book, more specifically artwork, as she's talking about the history of hero licensing in America, and then its wider reach and impact on the greater world that this takes place in. And I really do find this artwork, just off its own merits, to just be fantastic. I will admit that it's not really the kind of style of comic book artwork that I'm really keen on, but all the same, the quality that is there is just brilliant, and I like the way that it's almost able to bridge the gap between being something that does feel very traditional by American comic book standards, yet there's still something about the art, with the designs of the costumes and the colouring, that does have some echoes of more the kind of thing I'd been seeing in a certain manga and anime series more recently. So it does have that neat little crossover where it's still distinctly American and has a very distinct design, which, let's be honest, is not really keeping with this world and how things look within this world. Yet at the same time, it still feels like it is part of it. It doesn't feel like it's this totally alien thing, this totally strange interpretation of life and how this world looks. You know, let's be honest, I suppose that if this was about, oh, the hero licensing thing came from France, they'd probably look more like French comic book characters with everyone having a big nose. Or if we were talking about, oh, how it came from the UK, every kind of character shot would be these grey, murderous-looking heroes or some very stylistically ugly characters, depending on which direction of British comic books they want to go down, or in some cases Scottish or English or Welsh, depending on the specific region. But regardless, I do like this shift in art style for these moments, because if nothing else, I really do feel as though it helps this delivery of information really come to life in a way that just adapting the artwork from the manga really wouldn't have done. Yes, there's still some aspects of it that are very clear callbacks to the panel work and the artwork within the manga, but more often than not, what we end up seeing is a lot more, like I say, very traditional, very American-style comic book art, which really does help to make this whole series of events, this discussion, stand out in a way that I feel that the more standard animation and art style that we've had with this series and the main series frankly wouldn't. I mean, let's just grasp the thistle here, and this is something I'll discuss in greater detail later on. This episode is an exposition dump. There's no polite way in saying it. This is an episode where a good quarter of the runtime, if not a half of the runtime, is just exposition, 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 exposition. And this visual flair, this changing of the art style, even if it is just done in the form of freeze frames, really helps to make this come alive, makes it stand out in a way in which, quite frankly, I don't think that just using more traditional anime and manga art styles really would have done. And this is one of those moments of change and adaptation that I have to say that I have liked with this series. I know that, and this is something I've known about for as long as I've been interested in writing, that there is always this conflict, and as always has been and there always will be, about adaptation and what can be changed and what should be changed. And with what I've learnt from reading anime and watching anime and reading manga, in this world it's a lot more one-to-one, it's a lot more faithful, but stuff like this, I think these are the kind of changes that really do add something to this, because even if you are not personally a fan of American-style comic books, or comic book artwork that is not typically more manga, you have to admit that at least doing this in this way, it adds a level of flair here that really makes this stuff come alive in a way that, again, just using typical anime and manga art and animation really wouldn't have done. Yes, I would have liked to see some of this stuff animated, like if we suddenly got these brief, even if it's just a few little frames of just these very traditional American-style animated characters just moving in a way which looked very traditionally American animation, I think that would have made it a little bit more interesting. Even if it was just a simple thing of them just standing on a building and a cape flapping in the background, or one of them looking heroically up to the sun, or something along those lines. But in fairness, this whole sequence of events is a reference to comics, not animation. As such, I'm willing to accept that, and I'm not going to hold it against it. And I will just say is that whilst, look, I'm going to be blunt, the juxtaposition between these two art styles doesn't feel as stark as it really should to. Like, just sitting here and thinking about it, you have, this is a very, very deliberate, very over adaptation of a drastically different art style to anything we've seen in either of the series. Typically, and as you can see from the previews and also in the opening sequences, we do have an American hero joining the cast next week, and they are drawn in the exact same way as just any other given anime manga character. So we don't really have like a definitive, like, almost in-universe reason to explain why these different heroes in different worlds look so distinct from one another. But just having it in this moment, it does make it look good. And I think that maybe part of the reason why we are able, or at least I'm able to accept this a little bit more, is, well, one, because I'm a lot more familiar with comic books than I am necessarily with manga, but it's also the fact that this series has made it very deliberate to create this feel of comic books. You see whenever you get the present Mike voiceover talking about whoever's quirk is on screen, and you get the little like panel work that makes it look like the meanwhile kind of stuff, and you get the onomatopoeias appearing in ways that look very comic book like. So having someone is very just explicitly traditionally American comic book, I think works here, and it works for this moment. I think that the presence of the other material helps to sell that, but I just think it really works well, and I think that it ultimately makes this exposition dump a lot easier to swallow. This is an episode that in the manga and now in with the anime and the wider My Hero Academia series is one that actually takes time to try and explain how the hero ranking system works and how the industry more generally works. Now, well, be honest, like I have read the manga and I've read pretty much up until, well, literally I'm about to start volume 8 at some point over the next few weeks, but I was curious when it came to how they'd adapt this, how much they would end up keeping in with this, because this is an episode that ends up revealing that the core concept, the originator of the hero licensing system, comes from the United States and specifically comes from Rhode Island. Now, I will admit that in the past I mistakenly said, oh, it's in New Jersey, but, you know, my mistakes. But in any case, I was curious as to whether they keep that to be the case, or to keep it kind of a little bit more vague. I don't know why I thought this. I just think that it was one of those things that, I don't know. It's one of those changes to the law which would, it's one of those things that it would be a minor change on their part, but it's one of those things you can imagine seeing dozens of videos of people just busting a nut how disrespectful and how wrong it is, and oh my god, all the changes from the source material, oh my god, they're ruining the law because they changed the location of one thing. But I am glad that they did keep it the way that it is. Now, I will admit that for some people that are just watching this and haven't read the manga, or are just watching this fresh, or even from people that watch from the manga, it might seem odd that what is ultimately a local authority in a random given state in the United States would end up becoming the basis of an international legal system. But I'm willing to accept it because these kind of things can evolve very quickly, and particularly bearing in mind that this licensing system comes from a period in this world's history around the time that quirks were first starting to appear and hero culture itself was starting to develop itself. So it would have just started out as this thing done in this one part of the country, it's successful, so it's rolled out to a statewide thing, then eventually to a nationwide thing, and from there it would end up being adopted by other major world nations, one way or another, given how international hegemonic influences can be. And I'm willing to accept that this evolution could happen in the decades or possibly near century that quirks have been here. I'll be honest, I'll be able to accept that a lot more than the thing that we learnt from the main series, or was hinted to us at the very least, that Reed Destro's grandmother is the one that came up with the names for quirks, which doesn't make sense, as given that this, by the time that she would have been around, this would be decades into the known existence of quirks. But regardless, I'm more willing to accept stuff like this because at the very least it feels as though it makes sense to me. It's something that is tangible, it's something that is real, it's something that feels very in keeping to almost like real world licensing and bureaucracy. I will admit that I am a sucker for the more litigious world building like this. I don't know why, but things like history, legal information, and board meetings that are presented like this, I just get an odd kick out of in fiction, and I don't know why. It might be because I've been in so many over the years, it might be because I've been drunk in so many of them over the years, but I don't know why. There's something about getting information like this and in this form that does resonate with me, or at least getting information like this, because this isn't like oh, this is the origin of a specific hero, or this is the origin of this, oh, the licensing thing came along because there was this big fight or big war. No, it's just something that ultimately came out of a few council meetings, and I'm perfectly okay with that. I'm okay with that. I like that, and it is something that does, for the sake of Crawler and Makato, it does end up helping to develop this relationship between the two of them, a relationship which Popstep is taking a very specific way and isn't very best pleased about, but the way that it ends up it sets up so that this is how this whole exposition dump can come along, and it being for an exam and being for his studies, that's why we're getting this. I can accept, even if I'm not keen at the fact that it is still a law dump. Still, the thrust of it is ultimately to give us a clearer idea of how this world functions, so that we can set stuff up for later on, as well as to contextualise and recontextualise stuff from the past. Not majorly recontextualising, but at least done in a way that It gives us an understanding about how this all works. It gives an understanding as to why All Might and the others are considered the best of the best, and why they're so high up in the hero rankings, and why people like Knuckle Duster and the rest of the Vigilantes aren't as respective. And to a certain degree, you can argue that it does kind of justify Stain's point of view, even though Stain's point of view, as established a couple episodes ago, it's not quite the same. Like, his justification for doing what he's doing isn't because it's a popularity contest. It's because he doesn't like seemingly the idea of alter egos, but that's a whole other discussion for a whole other time. As I say, I really do love how this is a very fun episode. It has a charming energy to it. I love the comedy in it. I don't know why, but I really do get a kick in this series when we just have these moments where extended cast and side characters and extras are kind of slagging off our characters. Like, you have the sequence of events when Makato and Crawl are collecting all this information. You just get all these extra characters just slagging off Crawler and Popstep and Knuckle Duster, talking about how Crawler is still a little bit creepy and weird, and all the kind of uncomfortable pervy stuff this about Popstep, and how everyone just thinks that Knuckle Duster is just an odd man, and I do like that stuff. And we have the whole thing of Crawler trying to, in a very traditional comic book sense of it, try to hide his secret identity. Even though there was still that moment in the episode where he's just cleaning stuff away in his flat, where he has to try and hide his All Might hoodie. He thinks, oh no, I better hide my All Might hoodie, otherwise she'll realise I'm Crawler. But I'm just sat there thinking to myself, mate, this is mass-produced merchandise. The fact that you just so happen to own one of these things is not an indicator that you yourself are Crawler. Like, the one benefit of your superhero costume is it's probably, in the context of this universe, probably the most generic thing you could possibly be wearing. It's a brilliant disguise because every bugger in this damn country at this point in the sodding story owns one of these damn things. I also get it because of the fact that he's just this spindly little weed that he probably would be a lot more overt if he just put it on just for the sake of just nipping to the shops. You know, it'd be a lot more a case of, oh my god, he was Crawler all along, bum bum bum, or as she accidentally says, Crawler. And I do still like the twist at the end of this little episode thing where she asks him. We get the big thing of, oh, this is Makato and her quirk is polygraph, and she's able to detect when someone's lying, and she's asked the wrong question. I like that. It's a cute little moment. With that said, let's get into the negatives. I don't think this will be an especially long episode, because this is well, whatever, I'll discuss that in the overview. The big negative that I have, and it's something that I've indicated over the course of this review up to this point, is the fact that ultimately, whilst this is a very enjoyable story, and I do like the little bits of, well, not so much character charm, but so much as character guys and character moments, is the fact that this is an episode that ultimately a good quarter to half of it is just exposition, and is just designed for the sake of teaching us about something which, in hindsight, yes, it does have relevance to everything that's going on here, and it does end up aligning to a theme, both within this series but also the main series to a degree, because we have that line from the main series which, you know, well, I don't remember the line exactly, but it's, you don't need a superpower to be a hero, which I think some people have been misinterpreting. This week, this also plays into that idea that there's being more to being a hero than just being popular. It is saving people, which is something we do get established here, or at least from the point of view of, I think, Makato, as well as our main extended cast in this episode. But all the same, this is an episode which does spend a large section of its runtime just going, and this law was invented in this part of the world, and it was invented for this, and also why do you think this is like this, and why is that like this? Let's talk about your high school history exam and all the things you know about. And again, whilst this stuff is informative and interesting, this is ultimately a series of events that is told over the case of a voiceover. With, whilst it is great artwork, it's ultimately just a PowerPoint. That's ultimately what it is. It's a PowerPoint. It's our characters sitting around talking about something as a PowerPoint plays in the background. Again, a brilliant, well put together PowerPoint, but a PowerPoint nonetheless. A little bit of animation, even if it's just, like I said previously, a character standing on a rooftop with a cape flapping in the wind, would be something that would add something a little more visually to that sequence of events. Or hell, maybe, well, actually I was going to suggest something really out of the box, but I would just say that You know, maybe they could have teamed up with an American animation company, just animate this little sequence, like the little shots of these American heroes being animated by an American animation company would be neat. At the very least, I think that could have been something that could have been introduced in to make it look more visually interesting. Because if you're going to go to the point of having the juxtaposition between having two very, very different visual styles, I don't see why you couldn't have gone the full hog, but whatever, that's a different strokes. That is a very much how I would have done things sense of it. But with that said, let's get into the overview and just say that I really did enjoy this episode. It was fascinating. I did love relearning this information about how the legal system and the quote licensing system works, as it's ultimately something I do really love for some reason. I don't know why. Don't ask me why. Don't add me to ask me why. I don't know, but I do like it, and it's presented in a way which still, despite almost a quarter to a half of the runtime being exposition, it's delivered in a way which is visually interesting, and everything that we get thereafter is still fun enough that it almost makes up for everything we had up until that point. You can't get away from the fact that it's just, yes, it's kind of trite little love triangle garbage, but at the same time, it's done in a fun way, and I can't knock it for that. Well, that's said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner, only a short one, only one this week, and it comes from Big X1 who says, this is of course referring to last week's episode, Crossing Lines. This was everything I hoped it could be. Thank you for your comment, and just looking online, everyone just seems to have just generally loved this one. It has been refreshing to see that now people are starting to get into it, because I will admit that it's around like a couple episodes before this where I too, when I was reading, was thinking, do I really want to commit to this longer term, because this isn't really hitting for me. But then you got the episode in the manga called Him, and things twitched, things changed, and this week we got the extra bit with the with the law dump, which again, I'm fascinated about that stuff, but still, it was a law dump beyond anything else. Let me know what you thought about this week's episode in the comment section down below, and you will be read out in a future video. Thank you all for watching. I'll just also say thank you for helping me break 150 subscribers. Would be neat to hit 160 by the end of the year, but hey, I'm not demanding. But anyway, thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye! Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!